We are back with another How to Succeed podcast, brought to you by Sandler, the worldwide leader in sales management and customer service training. Over 200 locations and an enterprise team around the world. For more information, go to sandler.com. I'm your host, Mike Montague. And this week, we're talking with Kallie Klein from our enterprise training team about how to succeed at improving your BAT, your BAT. You should know what that stands for if you're listening to this show very often, but we're going to dive deep into it, talk about how Kallie helps enterprise teams grow their skills, grow their behavior, their attitude, their technique, get performance improvement, all of that next year on the How to Succeed podcast. Here we go. All right, Kallie, tell me a little bit about the work you do with the enterprise team and how you help sales team improve their batting average, close more deals, sell more easily at higher margins. You do this with very large teams that could be anywhere from hundreds to thousands of salespeople. So I'm excited to talk to you here today.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I am on the enterprise side of the business and work with large enterprise accounts. I am a facilitator. So I not only partner with salespeople through the sales process, but once they become a client, I closely partnership with the leadership and or sales enablement teams, and then actually execute the training, whether that be in person, whether that be virtual, or a mix of both. I'm really kind of the front line where I am kind of helping them to uncover what kind of struggles and challenges they might have throughout the sales process, and then execute the training based on whatever challenges they might be facing.
Love that. Now we're talking about improving your batting average today, and it's baseball season and stuff, but really we're talking about the success triangles with Sandler, and we help people improve their attitude, behavior, and technique. On this show, we start with the attitude. So I'm wondering, in enterprise, when you're talking about try to change the behaviors, the skills, the attitudes of hundreds of salespeople at a time, what are maybe some common myths and misconceptions that you see with enterprise groups or large sales teams? And then what is the ideal attitude of maybe a sales leader who's trying to make performance improvement happen?
Yeah. So first of all, really glad we're not talking about baseball, because that is certainly not my strong suit. But I do have some passion around the success triangle and the idea of attitudes, behaviors, and techniques coming together in order to become more successful. When you ask me like around myths or misconceptions, I'm not sure I know exactly what you're asking, but I'm going to try, and then you tell me if I'm kind of hitting or missing. But I would think that kind of a big misconception is that people that have been in sales for a long time don't want to learn or don't want to develop or have the attitude that they've got it all figured out. You know, I think that there's a difference, especially in the world in which that I kind of play in, is that many times these people aren't opting in themselves to do training or to learn. They are opted in. And I think that there are some real situations in which they kind of feel like they're hostages, like they have to be at training. But then there is oftentimes this misconception that just because I've been in training or in sales and I've been successful for 20 or 30 years, sometimes even as on the Sandler side of things, we start to have the attitude or the belief that they don't want to be here. And so that can get in the way of the rapport and of connecting even the techniques and the behaviors that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So I would say that can impact not just the Sandler mentality, but also from the learner perspective. Like, I want to be here, or maybe you have to prove to me a little bit that you can teach me something and maybe help me to change my perspective on something. I might have to earn that a little bit more. But I would say that that's probably a misconception that some of us can fall into. Is that what you were going for?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I was thinking of several that we run into in all of our clients. You mentioned having to prove it. Like, how can, and when you change your sales, sometimes there's a pushback to any type of change, which isn't necessarily a hostage or a bad thing. It's just, we don't want to get worse, but obviously that's not the point of sales training. It's to make you better and to save you time. And so I think once people start learning those lessons, they start buying in real fast and they go, oh no, this is the way I want to be selling. I want to learn these things. I want to learn this questioning technique to get better and to close more sales. And so they start to get some momentum going, which helps a lot. The other thing that you kind of hinted at that I wanted to bring up is not just experience, but also abilities. Sometimes people think sales training is only for bad salespeople.
Right.
And they're like, oh, we need to make performance improvement on these people who are not hitting quota. But oftentimes it works better with the best salespeople, the smartest people in your organization, the driven winners that are going out, willing to do anything, try anything, say anything to improve their sales. They're really the ones that can improve their batting average a lot. And sometimes they're getting more at bats. So we only have to improve them a little bit, right? They're hitting home runs every time they go out there. That's a lot easier than taking somebody who's striking out every time and getting them to hit.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to the attitude side of the success triangle too, right? It's like, for me, it isn't necessarily like a feeling that you have about wanting to do something, but you have to have at least the conviction to want to start somewhere. So like to your point, these successful salespeople have the conviction and the belief that they want to do better and that they have the ability to do it, right? And or have the desire to want to get better. Now, they might not be convinced yet that Sandler is the way that they're going to get better, right? But at least they have that seed implanted in the desire in their gut that they know that they want to do better. And I do think when we think about the attitude side of the triangle, for me, I think it's the more complex side, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, the cart before the horse or the chicken before the egg kind of thing when we talk about attitude and behavior. I do think that the desire has to be there. I don't think that you have to believe how you're going to get better or believe that this is the way that you're going to get better, but I believe you have to have that belief that you want to get better or that desire to get better. Whether that be about something in life or something around specifically prospecting or getting better at asking really specific things around asking for introductions or whatever it might be, you have to at least have that desire there. Now, shifting.
I'd add on to that too is there's sort of situational things where you can want to sometimes, but just get burnt out. And a lot of people overlook that. When they're talking about improving their batting average, they go, oh, well, I tried that and it didn't work. And so I gave up and now they've stopped improving, or I've been at this a while, or I've had a bad run and I'm in a little bit of a slump. And we forget how much trainers and leaders and managers and coaches really help us with that side of the attitude thing. Is we might believe we're capable, but day to day forget to take that personal responsibility for our own attitude. And sometimes those reminders I've seen make the biggest results in our clients. Is just one person who was burnt out gets engaged again, whether it's through the training or the investment from the company or from a coach. And all of a sudden you got a C player that's back in the A group,
Yeah, it can reignite that passion for wanting to do something. Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Now, the behaviors are a little bit different bucket. So kind of same question about what do we see with the good and the bad. But for me, this is the hardest bucket on the enterprise team. When you're talking about hundreds or thousands of people, you're trying to get them to change their behaviors, their goals, their plans, their actions day to day. This is something that you can't do by just saying, oh, this is the way we're doing it now. Good luck. Like, this is a big lift from a lot of people, reinforced a lot of times throughout the process. Can you tell us a little bit about what behavioral change looks like in an enterprise organization?
100%. So I think that it takes a lot of guts to do something different than what you've always done, right? I think that when you're working with big clients in the sense that I do, I think you have to really be super specific with what it is that they choose to change. Like, where do you start? Right. And what is the thing that's gonna, and I'll even say this in training. I'll be like, so out of everything that we talked about today, what makes you cringe? Like, what makes you so uncomfortable that you cannot even imagine saying that and seeing what would happen? And so we might even have a conversation around that. And then I challenge them with something super specific to say, that's the one thing I want you to do. Because if it's going to make you cringe, it's going to make you uncomfortable. It's going to clearly be something that you've not typically done. And the worst thing that can happen is the conversation doesn't go really well and you can't lose something you don't already have anyway, right? Sandler rule.
Yeah.
But I think that the specifics around what behaviors you're going to change and making it super real for them, like using words like, does this make you cringe? Well, that's probably because it's uncomfortable and it's not something you normally would do. And so that's what is going to start then helping to prove to yourself that it works, or maybe that it doesn't work for you.
I love that. And specifically the lesson about being specific, because I think a lot of organizations, small and large, try and boil the ocean right away. And they're saying like, we're going to change our whole sales process, all of our techniques. Everybody's going to start doing it this way. You know, after this 2-day boot camp, all of a sudden everything's going to be magically changed. And it's just really, really hard to do. But when you get really specific, and even the hand-to-hand combat, I see in large organizations sometimes people go, oh, well, we're just going to get all 200 people on a webinar and tell them to do it this way and expect that to change too. And what it takes is one-on-one conversation, small group exercises. Like normally your groups are 20 at a time, even if there's 100 people in the organization, so they can ask those questions. You can find out what's specifically holding them back. And then the managers having individual one-on-one conversations or listening to the call recordings and saying, hey, you didn't do it this time. What are you going to do differently next time? That's really where you start making the measurable behavioral changes one at a time in very specific small parts of it that add up to a big change over time or over a lot of people.
And making it feel safe to mess up, right? Like kind of being self-deprecating in the sense, like, I'll never forget my first Sandler sales call. Like my background, we're going to get into this a little bit more, but my background, I was a SaaS frontline salesperson in SMB, then mid-market, then great big enterprise clients. So I was not a bad salesperson, right? Like I was kind of good at what I did. And then I started to get Sandler trained. And to your point, I changed everything. And it was literally the worst sales call I've ever been on. It almost makes me tear up now just thinking about the humiliation I had. But almost even in those big training environments, to your point, with a cohort of 20 to 30 people, even telling stories of failure. And like sometimes, you know, we say, so what was your latest success in the last week? And when I say that, I'll say, and sometimes success is also a failure because we're at least gutsy enough to do it. So let's talk about that too. If I find that people kind of shut down in a situation like that, what I'll typically do is just, you know, have them go and talk in smaller groups. And then I'll come back and I'll say, who had the juiciest story? Right. And then once one person starts to tell the story, whether in a positive or self-deprecating light, then the other people. And then as other people start sharing, maybe not everybody, and most of the time, not everybody has changed any behaviors at that point. But the more we're able to talk about the small things that people do and the outcomes that they get from those small changes, then people start to buy in and then their attitudes start to shift, right? And then they're more and more willing to make those changes.
Yeah, I think that culture change is huge. And I've seen that a lot where kind of maybe it's that top performer has the guts to try it first and they win one. Or sometimes it's the opposite, which I love too, where a top performer is walking by somebody who doesn't make quota and they say something awesome or they win a deal and you go, well, if they can win a deal using that, I can definitely win a deal using that.
Yeah.
And it starts to spread, and that change virus kind of starts spreading from person to person. And I think peer mentoring and accountability and role play together and having them talk about how do you use it, or how did you say it on the call, or do you have a recording of that? Because I want to hear how you did it, that's really where it starts getting big change across an organization.
Yeah, and just helping people really understand the concept of success triangle. Like really pulling that into all the different conversations that we have and helping them to really understand how behavior can truly change your attitude. Like, behavior can prove or disprove a theory that you have about yourself in so many different aspects of your life, not just in selling. And so I think if you bring that back to them, then they start to learn how to internalize some of that so that they buy into it. We at Sandler, we don't believe in convincing anyone, but it's around connecting those concepts, those actions, those attitudes, those techniques all together so that then they can see how they can then take one step closer to the wild success that they might be dreaming of or whatever.
And that takes us to the technique portion of our discussion. And I guess there's a lot of places we could go here, and it's hard when you're talking generally with a big team. But I do know that in the enterprise division, you guys usually focus on a few techniques rather than, the big thing. Like if we can just get everybody doing a good upfront contract, we can really move the needle first, and then we'll worry about the other stuff. Do any techniques like that jump out to you, or are there techniques for, improving our batting average quickly?
Yeah. So honestly, like a lot of the buying reasons at this level that we hear oftentimes is we have to create a common language. We have to create a common selling methodology. So not to kind of repeat what you said, but upfront contracts are almost always one of the first wins that we see. Like I was just working with a large SaaS company actually earlier today, and we have the BDRs, so business development or sales development reps. We have the account executives who do the net new selling or the hunting as well as expanding. And then we have the SCs who are the technology experts, the real technical folks that ask all the real detailed questions. And some of their buying reasons was we have to create a common language. We've got a lot of hands in the pot throughout the sales process. And B, we have to start qualifying earlier and heavier before we start pulling in all of these other internal resources like SCs. And so when we can start with an upfront contract, using them not just with clients, but internally in like their prep calls, right?
Yeah.
And really understanding that outcome piece of the upfront contract is really what helps to move the sales process along and helps for the ask of what we're going to do next and make sure that we're all in alignment. That is typically what I have found in my own personal experience is the thing that hits them the quickest and has the hardest impact. The other thing that I say typically in my upfront contract with a new client, with either kicking off a 2-day boot camp or kicking off a 3-year contract that we're going to do virtually, is I say, if I can have you all ask 2 or 3 more questions in your sales process that you typically wouldn't ask in the first, whatever the sales cycle looks like, but early on in the sales cycle, I have done my job.
Yeah.
Because then they're at least that way it doesn't feel so overwhelming, right? They're not trying to change every single thing, but it's like, here's some techniques. Now you choose the top 2 or 3 that you just feel like you can, let's go back to baseball, hit out of the ballpark, right? And what can you really nail? And then, of course, we work with them moving forward with one-on-one coaching sessions or, reinforcement or whatever to help expand that. But that first initial win is typically ask a couple more questions than you typically would. Use that upfront contract to, eliminate any mutual mystification, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I see that too. And just to highlight those, upfront contracts are really all about knowing what the next step is. And way too many salespeople, especially on large teams, you'll find a wide variety of experiences and people that haven't learned the lesson the hard way yet. But they're just not getting outcomes, whether that's a yes or a no or another meeting. Is like, if we just knew what was going to happen next, it would make a huge impact. And part of that is defining your sales cycle and creating that common language and knowing like, okay, we're in SaaS, we're going to do a software demo. So like, when do we do the demo? When do we want to do it? Who do we need to be there? What do we need to know about the client before we do the demo? Getting all that stuff figured out solves a lot of problems ahead of time. And then I love the third one you brought too, which is mostly for me, I find around pain. But people are saying, oh, they say they have this problem and they don't ask those 2 or 3 extra questions about how bad is the problem? How many users are there going to be? How much money is this costing you? Is this important now? Is it important in the third quarter? Like, when do you want to start seeing results? And just a few more questions to go a little bit deeper on things like pain, budget, decision. If you get really good at those 3, those will make some huge impacts right away. And then the one maybe you didn't mention that I'd follow up with you on is, how many people do you think get stuck on price negotiations or any sort of like quarterly discounting? Is that a common issue for you?
When you say how many people get stuck on that, are you talking about from a buyer's perspective or from a selling perspective?
Selling perspective, like enterprise clients. I tend to see, especially those public organizations that need to hit quarterly numbers, do like big discounting, or they start losing margins, or they have competitors because they're a huge company that are discounting or doing some sort of trial offer or free offer, or doing a lot of price negotiations rather than pain and negotiated work.
Well, what's interesting that I have learned around when sellers get really focused on the pricing and the negotiation and discounting and things like that, that typically is more so an attitude issue rather than a technique issue. And oftentimes, even when I've done negotiating training, it really goes back to, we spend the majority of the time reframing the way that they think about things. Yeah. And, you know, like the same session I was just referring to, we did pain earlier today, and we do an opening exercise that asks them, what did you recently buy? Why did you buy it? What emotion did you feel? And did you buy the cheapest thing in the marketplace? Right. I've never had someone say I bought the cheapest thing in the marketplace. Typically the outcome of that exercise is, actually, I didn't even think about the price because I wanted it so badly. Right. Which is kind of the point that we're trying to make. But so I always kind of go back to that reframing of the way that you think. And then I ask them, I'm like, would you want to work for the cheapest like solution in the market? Like, do you want to be a part of the cheapest solution? Because if you do, talk about feeling like a robot on a machine doing the same thing over and over and over again, right? You don't need the skill set when you're the cheapest in the market. So I think, it's of my opinion, of course, we have great negotiation techniques that we can do, but if we don't address the attitude around it first and the head trash stuff that we talk about, you know, the negative beliefs around pricing and negotiation and stuff, then the techniques are going to fall flat and they certainly won't change their behaviors.
Yeah, I love that. And you really reframed that. And it made me think of it happens on a local level too in our sure. Local and regional offices, but even in enterprise, we get these different accounts that some of our largest accounts of the years have been like the Girl Scouts who don't have a budget. They're asking for donations, or they're selling cookies, and it's not a price negotiation at all. It's a pain and impact discussion. Or other construction companies or services where it's a large I don't know which names I can say, but like app where they're trying to get user activations or business activations on their app, and there's no money being exchanged at all. It's a third party that's paying for the service, but they're trying to get businesses to sign up on their apps. That's a lot different discussion than, you know, we need to pay $100 a month for the software. Right. And so I think when we see that diversity in accounts, those lessons start crossing over, which I think is really cool. And be like, well, what if there wasn't a price involved? Or what if everybody was the same price? What would that look like? And it becomes very interesting.
Yep. And it definitely helps them to pull back and think about it in a different way because, especially if they've just recently, so many of us have had price increases lately, right? And if we haven't, what are you doing? Right. Um, but so much of that is kind of timely right now. And so, yeah, you have to maybe take yourself out of that and to your point, reframe it and think about what if the field was completely leveled, right? What would that conversation look like then? Yeah.
All right. Now I want to get to know you a little bit better here, Kallie, before we let you go. Once again, we're talking with Kallie Klein, one of our enterprise facilitators here at Sandler. And my first question for you is, how do you define success for yourself at this point in your career?
So for me at this point in my career, defining success, of course, money is involved, right? Like what I want to be, what I want to accomplish financially, the financial freedom to be able to do the things that I want to do. But the thing that keeps me going day to day is really knowing that I am having a positive and healthy impact on the people that I work with, that I really am helping to navigate change in people's lives, and that I am connected to something that also impacts me as an individual personally and motivates me to, like, instead of thinking about I have to work, being able to get to work and like that I have the privilege of working is really, really important to me.
I like that. Now, on the flip side, you mentioned a couple of failures earlier, but do you have a particular failure you're most proud of, or a hard lesson learned you had to get over in order to be successful?
Well, of course. How much time do you have? I would say, I can come up with like really specific examples in my selling career where I could kick myself, like when I had a really big deal that maybe I didn't ask some of the tough questions. But I would just say overall, like if I think about if I were to go back in time to my 25-year-old self and tell me like something that, I certainly would say that like I would wish that I would have believed in myself to the level that I do today, and not doubt myself in the way that I did. Just I think years and maturity and things like that help with those things, but just not holding yourself back because you are comparing yourself to someone else. Just like put yourself out there, be more willing to fail more often so that then you can learn from that. I don't know if that's answering your question, but that's something I think about a lot.
And do you have a favorite Sandler rule or a favorite quote you try to remember?
Anybody that knows me probably will not be surprised, but my favorite Sandler rule is if you feel it, say it. And I live and breathe that on a regular basis. I am a firm believer that you can say anything to anyone as long as you can say it in the right tone. Did it just the other day. Had someone that I felt just we were not connecting. And I just straight up asked him, "Are you upset about something?" And he pushed back and said, "No, why do you ask?" And I said, "Well, you just seem a little grumpy." And ended up, we had a great conversation. He actually came back to it, said, "You know what? I am upset about something." And so we were able to pull that out. And then at the end of it, he's like, "I really like how you're such a straight shooter, So I'm a big believer, and you got to say it. It's just the same in a training situation. You get people that are just ghosting you and off camera and on mute. You just got to call it out. Like, you guys, I'm not here for my health. Like, this is weird. I don't want to just train people in a bunch of black boxes on my screen." So I believe that you can get a lot of value if you're just real and you just say how you feel.
I like it. Kallie, thank you so much for being on the show. Again, reach out to our enterprise team and talk to the people that can set you up with Kallie. If you are international organization, multi-language, multi-location, you have more than 100 salespeople, that's probably a pretty good reason to reach out to our enterprise team. If not, you can always reach out to a local office. Click on Find a Training Center at Sandler.com and find a local training center near you. We help individuals all the way up to Fortune 500 companies, so happy to help. Don't forget to subscribe, send this episode to somebody that you think needs to hear it. And until next time, whatever you are, be a good one. See you, everybody.